And now, without much further ado, I will turn it over to our student introducers who will introduce our speakers for this evening. They are MFA candidate Muna Malik and MA curatorial candidate Alice Suyuan Jam. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for the introduction. So I will be introducing Mackenzie Wark. Mackenzie Wark is an Australian-born writer, critical theorist, and professor of culture media at the Eugene Lang College of Liberal Arts at the New School. She's the author of numerous groundbreaking theoretical works, including A Hacker Manifesto, a foundational text of digital media studies, as well as Gamer Theory, The Beach Beneath the Street, Molecular Red, and Capital is Dead. In recent years, Wark's writing has tended towards an auto-fictional register, taking sexual aesthetics, disassociation, and Wark's own experience of coming out as a trans woman as starting points for theorizing new models of contemporary living. Reverse Cowgirl, Wark's self-described orthography of the opacity of selves, traces her failed attempts as living as a gay man during the 1970s and 80s, and her subsequent journey towards life as a trans woman in the 2010s. Employing a blend of low theory, personal recollection, and sex writing as tools for rethinking the narrative boundaries of trans life and literature. Thank you.
And I will be introducing Madison. Madison Moore is a DJ and assistant professor of critical studies at USC Roski. Madison holds a PhD in American Studies from Yale University and has held previous positions at Virginia Commonwealth University, the New School, the University of Richmond, and King's College London, and has been a visiting guest artist in the David Geffen School of Drama at Yale. They are broadly invested in the aesthetic, sonic, and spatial strategies queer people of color use to both survive and thrive in the face of catastrophe. Madison's first book, Fabulous, The Rise of the Beautiful Eccentric, offers an analysis of fabulousness as a practice of resistance. Last year, Madison held a 6-week nightlife residency at the Kitchen in New York and was the inaugural scholar-in-residence at the Fire Island Artist Residency. I was really lucky to get to take a class with Madison last semester and see them bring the pleasure and energy from dancing to talking about minoritarian performance. And that was also when I truly felt centered and affirmed as a student in a classroom in ways that I haven't been before. We got to watch a video snapshots of Madison's performance lecture and curated public programs at the Kitchen that activated artist Sadie Barnett's The New Eagle Creek Saloon, which is an installation that reimagines the first Black-owned gay bar in San Francisco. Madison has also performed internationally at the Perth Festival in Australia, Performance Space Sydney, Somers House Studios London, Tate Britain, the Portland Institute for Contemporary Art, American Realness, and the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Madison's currently working on a book about race scenes and queer of color undergrounds. And together with Mackenzie, they co-edited the most recent E-Flux issue titled Black Rave, which we will hear more about today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me at USC Roski. I flew in this morning and the pressure in my ears has not equalized yet, and I feel like I'm underwater. So if I'm looking in the wrong direction when you're speaking or anything like that, it's like, don't take it personally. It's like I'm having a little trouble hearing at the moment. So just, that is that. Yes, so we did this thing, which we launched in New York City last night, that we called Black Rave, as a way of making a little intervention in thinking about as sort of a cluster of things: techno, rave, nightlife, dance floor, queerness, transness, but where I think the dominant, and sound studies and so on, and it came together with these two words, Black Rave, and we'll talk a little bit about what would techno studies be like, and how would that be a thing one would do, particularly in an art school context, as I think we're thinking about a little bit. I just want to say a little bit how I sort of got to wanting to do this with Madison. So it's a story that takes place over nearly 15 years, I think. Long-standing interest in avant-gardes and bohemias and where they intersect. These were two books that I did on the Situations International. And interested in the sort of everyday life of aesthetic practices, of how do aesthetic practices and movements come out of experiences of the city, experiences of difference within the city. This is a comic strip version of my book that I did with Kevin Pyle. And these will be some of the concepts coming out of the situationist background that I would sort of want to bring towards whatever Black Rave is as an object of knowledge and practice. First of all, we live in a society of spectacle where the sort of image world that we seem to inhabit is a kind of double of capitalism itself, of a series of forces of production. Secondly, détournement. Within that, how do we repurpose the commodities that are made available to us to try to make habitable practices by making those things a commons that we can share? Thirdly, dérive. What is the practice of wandering the city and reimagining, reinventing the space of the city so that we can imagine another city for another life? The next one is psychogeography. What are the ambiences of the city, and as you pass through the city, how do you find different parts of it have certain feelings? Heading towards then, how can you construct experiences, environments that have aesthetic and social and cultural and political qualities that you might want? Situationists would have thought of this as an entire sort of revolutionary strategy. I'm not that optimistic. I feel like if we just like have a little corner to ourselves, that would be a start at the moment. So how, could play with those elements of the environment that is given be something that could be a practice that would include an aesthetic practice? That's one way of summing up. I had to write 2 freaking books to boil it down to that, but that's sort of where that is at the moment. So that's one thing I'm sort of bringing to this project. Another is I'm interested in sort of contemporary social types, like the idea of the social type is a 19th century idea of like how do we understand each other in the space of the city through topologies in a sense, and how do those topologies speak to our relation to underlying sort of force of production, social forces and so on. So I did a book called A Hacker Manifesto, I did a book called Gamer Theory. I would have called this book Raver or something, but it was in a series, so it had to be ing, so this book's raving. So hacker, gamer, raver is like 3 of the sort of social types that I want to sort of think about. And anyone seen this before? This is Rima Square. It's a way of thinking about differences. And that there can be more than one kind of difference and different ways of associating differences together. And you create a Grimm's square by starting with an assertion, its negation, then you find out what's complementary to it. So you sort of build out differences that have different qualities is a shorthand way of, it can be a way of like decoding how ideologies work. I think it's also a creative strategy as well, for thinking about all right, so I'm against that thing, but then that puts me into this different relation to this other kind of difference, and so on. Which leads to this 4-part diagram of social types, of which I've done 3. The hacker who repurposes existing information to make the new out of the old. The gamer for whom that's a zero-sum game, with winners and losers, whereas for the hacker it's not. The hacker and gamer tends to head more into the space of the spectacle. Raver is maybe pulling back out of that to try to think about what's a practice of creating constructed situations in everyday life. The one I'll probably not get around to actually writing is I think hustler is a really important kind of social type to think through in the 21st century. I'd love to do a project on sex workers. I'm not one though, so it would have to be a project that's about that externality, and I haven't figured out methodologically how to do that. So that would be the 4 ways of thinking about those differences in relation to each other. I can expand all this later. I'm already at 4 minutes, so I gotta hustle to get it done in 10. So I'm doing all that, and I came out as a trans woman, so I'm writing about all this other stuff now. But I think threads of that come through into this work. How do trans people become hackers of their own bodies? How is that an aesthetic practice as much as it's a medical one or a legal one or anything else? These were 2 of those books. Besides being, like gender dysphoric, I'm also kind of manic, so I always do with these projects. I did a previous eFlux journal on transfem aesthetics, which was leading me, among other things, towards nightlife. Like one of the spaces, and I'm a little specialized on trans women, one of the spaces trans women have just to be is nightlife, because there often isn't any other space. This would not be my story, but for trans people who are alienated from family, and for whom even the house where they live isn't necessarily safe, and the street is not safe, and the club's not safe either, but it's safer. And it's a space where one can gather and different kinds of social existence are possible. So that was one of the threads that came out of that. Bringing it all into the present, maybe we live in a disintegrating spectacle. It seems like the wheels are kind of falling off. Anybody knows how like Twitter just seems to disintegrate the more you attempt to use it at the moment? Which I think sort of allegorically for a disintegrating spectacle. Thinking about the city now is to think about gentrification. Like, is it even possible to inhabit parts of the city in ways that you would get to play with it and do something else with it? Everybody in New York City has got 5 roommates and 3 jobs, and so it's like, where is even the margin for the kinds of production of avant-gardes out of bohemias that used to be a characteristic of cities? The thing about détournement is there's entire platforms now based on exploiting free labor. So it doesn't work as a strategy in the same way that it used to, yeah? Where you sort of like break out of the property form of circulating culture for free. Well, the ruling class figured out, great, they made it all for free, let's like capitalize on that. AI generated imagery is one of the front lines of that, or these sort of like chat engines are just like scraping all this free content off the web to make things for people. But I think there's still constructed situations, and that's what a good rave is. And like a rave is a party, firstly, that's illegal, and it's better because it's illegal. Yeah, like that's the first thing about it. And it will take over a space that was made for some other purpose. It'll run all day and all night. And usually the music is techno, which brings us finally to that as a sort of sonic space. And what Madison and I wanted to do when we were working on this Black Red shoot together is, let's think about techno and center blackness. A lot of people think techno is like music white guys from Germany make. Like unz, 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 with a bunch of guys with shaved heads and hoodies. Nothing against that, but it has origins as one of the great black musics. And it's always had spaces of queerness in it, and you can even tease out a thread of transsexuality in it as well. And we wanted to do that. The thing is, when people start studying culture, you get like the official version, and then later people do, wait a minute, but let's make that queer. Or let's put women in the story. After that's why I started writing about Situationists. It's like, no one put the women in the story, so like I got to do that, But like, rather than do that second, let's start with the others, as not the others, but as actually the foundation of it. I think that was the main thought that we had. So I got a minute just to show some pictures. This is like, I just do a different thing every 3 to 5 years, and I usually stop doing research on that and go do something else. But I haven't stopped doing the field work, so it turns out I just really love going to raves. So, here's just some of my... One of the best things about raves is, the good ones, no one takes pictures. So these are a little bit, sort of skirting the edge of that. And there's a whole aesthetic about what's appropriate in terms of photography and documentation in that space. All right, this is the last one from my old camera before I got the iPhone 12. That's not going to be in my book because the quality wasn't good enough. But you got to love this. This is a free street party during the pandemic with the Statue of Liberty in the background in a dead-end street. It was a Black Lives Matter protest that turned into a rave, which is just kind of threading some things together that are very important. The thing I love about DJs, it's the last sort of front line before algorithms make all of our culture for us, because the DJ is a human who selects your tracks. Hands up who's listened to music chosen for them by algorithms. Yeah, right? And we all do, right? But I think for a human to have at least do that is kind of like an interesting way of thinking about what the relationship of the human is in digital culture. To think about constructed situations, light and fog. This is a party that happened in an abandoned or decommissioned office building in Manhattan, over 3 floors, all these different kind of spaces. And it's interesting when you damp down the visual sense, it's no longer a space that's directly about surveillance, and the auditory and the kinesthetic start to merge as kinds of sensory experience. You have different qualities. But this was a no photo party, and I'm like bending the rules a little bit. No one's in it. I didn't use a flash. It's off to the side where I wouldn't get caught. But you know, there's sort of like boundaries about how much the visual should intrude back into the space. And here I was just totally breaking the rules. I took the sticker off my. They put a sticker over your cameras on your phone so you won't take pictures, and I took it off to get this one because everybody just looks so happy and joyful. And here's all the elements coming together. This one happens in a skate park, and so the plywood floor with huge sub-bass bins on it vibrates the sound up through your feet and through your whole body. It's kind of magical. And because of that curved shape of the half pipe, the sound sort of bounces off that and around it in a very particular way. The crowd that shows for this one is kind of curated. You sort of have to know about it a little bit. There's issues about access. A friend of mine calls it reparative discrimination. Where is it where the people who are usually discriminated against are discriminated in favor of? And that's kind of an important practice to make certain kind of spaces work at all. But how do you do that without it seeming like an exclusive thing? Club kid culture is a whole other thing, and I actually love it. I just obviously don't qualify for it. But this is like a little different. You know, how do you create spaces where the people are what they're being a little bit? All right, so we're over time. I'll end it there. So this was like my journey towards why we would do a thing together called Black Rave. Literally past the mic.
Yes. So thank you for coming to the B2B. So with my time, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my kind of journey or interest in techno, and then read a little bit of a couple of bits from my Eflux essay.
You're not on the screen yet, though.
Oh, shit.
One sec. There we go.
Can you check the levels, Cash? Are they like to where they were earlier?
Yeah.
Okay. So for my essay in Eflux, I recorded a mix which is called Black Rave. So when you read the essay, the idea is that you listen to the mix as you read or whenever. So I'm gonna just play that at a low ambient volume while I speak. Take it down a little bit more.
It's as low as you can.
Okay. All right. I'll project. I come to techno from an interest in queer aesthetics, black queerness, the politics of pleasure, and especially queer nightlife. As a way of resisting the Afro-pessimistic impulse, I'm interested in thinking not about black suffering and pain, but following folks like Kevin Kashi and Tina Kemp and other black feminist thinkers. I'm interested in thinking through and alongside black aliveness, black vibrancy, black vibrations, black immediacy, black nowness. I'm interested in how black and brown, queer and trans people use aesthetics, sound, music, fashion, and performance to stage expansive, vibrant, and vibrating new worlds in the here and now, in spite of the five-alarm fire of queer color life. So all of this forms my current research project, which is called Dark Room, which focuses not on the mainstream gay club, which is kind of where my research in queer nightlife started, but instead on those illicit, secret, off-the-map, transient, grimy, soon-to-be bulldozed rave spaces. The kind of spaces I'm interested in are often fugitive in nature, so secret locations with strict no photography policies, locations announced only hours before, so before the party so as to avoid detection and surveillance, DIY. Here, I'm thinking about Fred Moten's notion of fugitive operations, so the idea of the rave is just kind of being in flight, or kind of constantly being in flight away from systems of surveillance. When I first started my nightlife research, I was mostly interested in club spaces. I was fascinated by the clubs of yesteryear, places like the Paradise Garage, which existed from 1978 to 87, where gay DJs perfected the art of mixing two records together. Sometimes when you research on the clubs of the past, reading all the juicy descriptions and trails of gossip, and then trying to imagine what these iconic rooms felt like, what they smelled like. Once you've done all this, you're already too late to the party, girl. You missed it. And so here's an example. In my research, I'm looking at this place, Paradise Garage. Here's the original sign, which, as I said, was from 77, 78 to 87. And it was on 84 King Street in kind of Tribeca. And when I see this sign, I'm trying to listen to it. I'm trying to hear the voices of black and brown clubbers as they pump to the garage for a cute little twirl. What did they wear? What was the highlight of the night? As time went on, and as my research got further into nightlife, I realized I actually hated being in gay clubs. I realized gay clubs can be fairly harmful environments rooted in homonormativity, sexual racism, body fascism, and so on. You could say I realized if you go to gay bars, you could say I realized that if you go to gay bars and you're not a straight acting white male or on the twink twunk axis, girl, good luck. So that's when I discovered the iridescent something else of techno spaces. Techno spaces, and especially queer techno spaces, have been a home for me, techno as practice. As a DJ, I love playing techno because it's a music of immediacy, of nowness. It's a music of noise complaints, of frequencies that can't be contained, a music of presence. At the same time, it's not often singable in the same way pop music is, with a chorus that everybody knows and a melody that everybody can sing. Probably my favorite thing about playing techno is watching all of you dance, move, sweat, and find your way into the beat. This is especially powerful when people say that they don't really like techno, but then y'all be the first ones acting a fool on the dance floor. In queer nightlife studies, the dance floor is often positioned as a space of world making. But what about the sound system? What can the sound system and the frequencies emanating out of it show us about the urgency of queer world making while living through rolling catastrophes? It's not an accident that the most important queer venues and black queer venues in nightlife history, from the Warehouse in Chicago to the Paradise Garage in New York to Club Heaven in Detroit, were all known for their sound systems. These systems were often menacing, often bringing audience together while guiding queer dancers eager to ride wavelengths to other dimensions. What do these wavelengths of queerness make possible? This is Kevin Jay-Z Prodigy, get into the chant. It wasn't until I moved to London, which was a coming of age for me, and got absorbed by the warehouse techno and queer dance music scene that I understood dancing, really dancing, sweating, working to unfamiliar music for hours on end. In the gay bars and clubs I was used to going to, cruising and grinder chats came first, and the music seemed a distant second. But in London, at queer parties like Savage, or Dawson Superstore, or Chaos, or Inferno, or Adonis, Shutdown, Chapter 10, BBZ, Pussy Palace, and Dance Tunnel, or even Vogue Fabrics, these spaces had fashion and fabulousness, but they also had great music. As an expat and tourist in London, I spent years going to warehouse techno parties throughout the UK, Europe, and London, at venues stretching from Elephant and Castle to Hackney Wick, often savoring the kooky night bus journeys I took to get home. I've trekked to Manchester and Glasgow on a moment's notice for a club night, and I used to love waking up at 7 a.m. on Sunday mornings to go to Jaded, the techno after hours at Corsica Studios that ran from 5 a.m. to 2 p.m. or later. My favorite, though, was stumbling out of that venue right on the Thames. What was that place called again? In the wee hours of the morning, the city empty and the smell of coffee from Cafe Nero starting to brew, then walking to Liverpool Street to get the 242 bus home. There's nothing like the thrill of walking up to a dark, foggy techno dance floor as an anonymous flow of beats surrounds you at 133, 35, 40 beats per minute. The same beats over and over, hypnotizing. The slightest change in melody, tempo. Work! A new sample, a new loop, intensity. The music wraps itself around you, takes you, and constantly brings you to the edge, a reminder of our capacity for feeling, as Audre Lorde says of the erotic. The philosopher Robin James describes techno as music that intensifies repetition to the limit of oral perception. The money shot comes when the limit is reached or crossed. That is, when the money shot occurs when the beat drops. But I think techno is much kinkier than that. This is a music of endurance, of going and going and going. And that's why I've always thought that techno was sort of like edge play. Urban Dictionary, edging. Getting seconds away from climax and stopping, waiting for a few more seconds and then starting again. Sonic edge play, perhaps. Dance music that takes you to a peak, puts you on the edge, and holds you captive in the pleasure over and over for an extended period of time. The final release occurs when the night ends. Vision is the first sense that goes on the techno dance floor. Most nightlife spaces are dark on purpose, both to expand the room, make it feel limitless, and then to hide the imperfections. Shadows, impressions, glimpses, redaction. But techno spaces take darkness to a new level. With vision removed and lighting that doesn't really help you see, and fog that obfuscates your vision even further, all you're left with are the sounds and impressions of what's around you. The room is filtered, the sound is not. Intensity, redaction, sonic edge play, impressions. This is the galvanizing allure of techno. That's it. Thanks.
So take that out of there.
All right, where do we start?
What about with sort of like techno studies as an idea? I think it's really interesting that when talking about or thinking about the history or the kinds of musics that are taken seriously by scholars or writers or even within institutions, you might know that hip hop studies, for example, is really, really basically like its own department. Not really, not yet, but it's a thing. Or jazz studies is for sure a thing. But for some reason, techno and other sort of like black queer musics or electronic musics have not quite made it to that space, and I'm really interested in like how you think about that sort of lack of attention paid to techno as a sonic.
Well, it's great, so we get to do it. Pardon me. Yeah, I mean, it's not like there's nothing. There's Kodo Ishin's book, More Brilliant Than the Sun. If anybody knows that one, just a magnificent book. It's not just about techno, but that's one of the threads to it. We were talking about DeForest Brown Jr.'s book. What's the first word of the title?
Assembling of Black Counterculture.
Assembly, thank you. Assembling of Black Counterculture. There's Dan Sicko's book, which is a sort of journalistic account of techno starting in Detroit. There's Der Klanger Family,
Yes.
with and of course even in English the title's in German, which is about the whole sort of Berlin thing. So there's stuff. Yeah, but it's like maybe like just next cab off the rank. Like no one's really thought, there's an aesthetic there. I mean, it seems like an anti-aesthetic sonic experience in some ways. It's sort of the most avant-garde kind of music you can actually get people to like on a mass scale. So I think that's maybe the challenge. Like it doesn't have the references to recognizable musical form that house still has. I love house music, but it's sort of like a different thing. I personally, my personal take on techno is that I love house music, but it seems made for the gay male body. And I'm sort of not. I tried to be a gay man 3 times and it didn't take, it wasn't quite right. Like, techno's not really made for anybody at all, it's human. I feel like techno's made for aliens. It's very hard to adapt your body. Kodo says this, sort of adapt your body to this like constant, 135, 145 BPM. So like everybody's an alien in it, so I don't feel any more alien than other people in relation to it. Like I feel like there's a space in it for transness as an experience of a dysphoric relation to the body. That's my personal reason to find that as a sonic space. It's dissociative in a way other music is maybe not quite so much. So yeah, I think maybe it's sort of asking for different kinds of aesthetic responses, but existing aesthetic categories about nightlife or about music don't quite work. From the point of view of jazz, it's barely music. From the point of view of, there's several really good books on mostly gay nightlife, even if the word queer is used in the title. It's sort of like not serving that, it's serving something else. So we need a new aesthetic. And isn't that what we're here for, right? To like come up with new aesthetic categories, experiences, practices.
Yeah, and I think that, within the kind of literature of like from, disco to techno, there's this guy Danveer Singh Brar's book, which is about Black electronic music in the 21st century. It's really sort of looking at like Actress and like kind of this UK history of kind of techno. And I think one of the things that I have really kind of been drawn to with the genre is its like insurrectionary potential, the sonic of it. It's music. I mean, you don't really get the feeling in here because we don't have, 4 towers or subwoofers, but it's music that really like happens to you, right? Rather than like listening to, it's music that occurs to you in the room, and it's a music of like immediacy and nowness. Like it's happening now, and that's something that I have really respond to with it. And it kind of like doesn't really leave a trace. So like you're not in general gonna be able to like hum a track when you go home. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes, and to me that kind of points to the idea of nightlife as like this ephemeral trace, all these kind of pieces that are maybe discarded, or like a wristband, or a bar stamp, or a drink ticket, or these kind of things that you might throw away that kind of evaporate, and that kind of would also point to the nightlife experience.
Yeah, and it's sort of fed certain kinds of aesthetic and cultural movements more than I think anybody's really traced out yet. Anybody know Wolfgang Tillmann's work? Photographer, just had a huge show in Europe. It's straight out of the Berlin version of the techno scene. Like that was the early work that he was famous for, and you see that way of seeing and perceiving that extended to all of these other subjects. So it's like, oh, this is kind of like this little like feeder for the rest of the culture, but where it's sort of like a scholar's job, I think, to be a little careful about how it's tended, to sort of unpick various levels of sort of commercializing and mythologizing a little bit to kind of bring it back to something that's kind of like more interesting. I don't want to say roots necessarily, but to like keep alive the sort of threads of, what else can happen in that cultural space.
So we each brought in a track to play.
Yeah.
Y'all want some more music?
Yeah.
Okay. So tell us about your one and what you know.
Why don't you just play a couple
Okay.
minutes? I'll
Okay.
play the whole thing, but just
Okay. Okay.
a minute and a half.
So.
That one, huh? And it's gonna build like this forever. Very patient with the little layers get added. Techno is very much about, to me, it's about the layering of sounds on top of each other, and the techniques that enables that, in a way that jazz wasn't. Like, jazz is sort of like being after it's improvised in time. This is an improvised against time, where you can wind back and play and stuff. Yeah, I found this in, if anyone remembers Kim's Video in New York City. It's like an amazing source of like all the movies and films, but also music, which you couldn't find anywhere else. It would be a Kim's Video. I found this, and I just like the cover. I was like, what is that? I don't know what that is. And then I played it, and it was like, what the F is this? It didn't make a lot of sense, you know? Yeah, and who we are, the voice will let us say, black electric, strong electric. And the way it's phrased as an I that speaks to the you, I feel implicated in the you. Like to me, it's like an early statement actually of potentially it could be other things with Afro-pessimism, that there's a wound that is never been addressed and is unreconcilable. And this is the voice from the past, but it's a voice that's also in the future because of the past that's never buried, it's always there. It's not the most famous underground resistance track, partly because it has a lyric. Like they're really known for these like bangers that we got plugged for in Germany, and they're amazing. And I love Sonic Destroyer and all that. But like this one seemed to me to be sort of like the essence of them. I always confused as whether this one's Nanny Town or Maroon. Yeah, Nanny Town. Yeah, the titles got switched at one point between pressings of the artwork. Either title works, but Nanny Town was a site of resistance in Jamaica that's named after Queen Nanny, originally from part of Africa that's now Ghana, who led a resistance movement against slavery and colonialism. So there's sort of little things buried in it, and this is an artifact from the pre-internet world where you could go look that up, and there's like a little story buried in that connects techno both to a past, but also actually to opening up the possibility of a future. That's simply what was interesting about it to me. But yeah, that was my track. We chose underground resistance is canonic, techno stuff, right? Mm-hmm. It's not the original, but maybe the second wave of it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What'd you pick? You didn't tell me what track you picked.
I didn't, because I keep changing my mind. I'm like, and even now I'm like, should I do this one or should I do the other one? What do you think? Should I do this one or should I do the other one?
I didn't know what you played yet, so.
What happened? Both. Do you have another one?
Nah, well, I could dig forever, but let's just do two, because we want to have a conversation.
Okay. Okay, so I'll do, let me open my thing. So, okay. everybody, so I play this because this is for sure one that everybody loves at the club. Oh, what is that? Oh, sorry. What am I doing? Okay. Everybody loves this. Especially when you play the opening, like little part, the sort of like tag, everybody's like, ah, they know it immediately. It's a classic Blake Baxter, classic sort of like Detroit techno with the heavy bass line, but also a little bit of sass. And one of the things that I really love about my approach to techno, or what in terms of like how I look for music and how I dig, is I like for music, for the tracks to be a little bit bitchy, to say, like to be to have a little bit of sauce on them. And so as you hear the kind of vocal come in, you'll hear a little bit of the sass I'm kind of talking about. So this history of sort of like the kind of vocalist sort of talking, right? Like basically reading or talking over the beat is such a practice that's really embedded with like house music and has been brought over into techno as well. Kind of like monotone, just like talking in a monotone voice, giving you instructions or telling you what they're doing or what it is, narrating the story. And just as a pro tip, if you want to get into Honey Dijon's new record, this kind of vocal trope is all over that record as well. The idea of like talking in a monotone voice as a way to kind of also punch up the beat and make you feel a little bit sassy. Like that's the point of that kind of like monotone vocal kind of practice there.
Like, I gotta admit, the techno I like to dance to has got no vocals at all. Zero. Like, that's just like, I do words for a living, like my brain is just like saturated in them, so it's like, just give me a night without words, that's kind of usually where I'm at. But I appreciate it.
Well, the next one doesn't have words either, so be good. Okay, so.
You gonna give us another one? I think it's one.
Oh, you don't like?
Yeah.
Well,
I do have a whole playlist on Spotify that's just black techno queer rave. If you want like 7 hours of like the entire history of, there's 7 different threads to it.
well, for the no words, this one is like one of the first techno tracks I discovered, and I at the time when I discovered this, I didn't know much about techno as a genre or its kind of history to connection to blackness. So with a track like this, as you listen, you hear how it starts. You mentioned talked about layering earlier, and it's like it starts with one idea and it just keeps adding more and more and more and more and more as it goes on. And that's kind of like this idea of layering is the kind of ground zero both of dance music and the work you do as a DJ. So, add this into your collection. It's really good.
Awesome. Yeah. All right. I'm sold. I dance to that. Yeah.
So how was it for you to kind of put together the special issue in terms of like, you know, what stories were told and kind of what work they're doing kind of together?
Yeah, all right. So there's like doing a project like that. I think that one of those questions is like, what are the differences that need attending to? So we wanted, you know, like who are our friends in existing academic aesthetic spaces who are sort of recognizable, but we could like push a little bit in this direction. Who, you know, outside of academia altogether, but in the actual scene do we want to hear from? Like which corners of that? Who's like coming up, you know, in through the academic space or the nightlife space? Who's in between is kind of interesting, you know, who's got foot in both camps and what's their perspective. Yeah, so besides doing the usual, and can we get out of the sort of American-centric view of it, you know, that's always hard, right? So, you know, I spent a long time looking for who do we know in Brazil. You know, I've never been there, but I really got to know about that. You know, we tried various things. We got somebody from there. Yeah, so I think that was sort of the first thing, and then the other thing is how do we like build in from the start that this is not trying to fit it into existing ways of thinking about particularly homosexuality in relation to nightlife culture. Like there's something that's specific to some of these techno spaces, and let it have its own language and let it have its own feeling that will come through that. It was obvious from the start we wanted a majority black issue, yeah? That was just a given. And it mostly is with a couple of exceptions, yeah? Yeah, I think those were sort of the things, and it's sort of like there's, like we thought a bit like, I'm not a DJ, but I do edit a lot, and I think they're analogous processes, like how are you putting things together that will, you know, that will be a mix, like how is this a mix of things that's distinctive, forward-looking, and, you know, as I mentioned, like builds in from the beginning. We're not going to have to come back a couple of years later and go, like, where are the queer people? They're not in here. Where are the women? Like, we're not going to do that second. We're going to do that at the start, you know, to get that flavor to it. But anyway, that's how I started thinking about it.
Yeah, and I think it's good to have like this mixture of, you know, scholars and artists, so like Marinx and feminists who are like practicing DJs and artists. And feminist is someone who I first saw in Berlin years ago, DJ, like some school, you know, abandoned school thing. One of the things she says in the issue that I found really fascinating was the way in which like Black trans women are able to look to DJing as a means of survival, which I found like a really potent thing, and so perhaps not needing to lean so much into sex work, but leaning more into the club, into DJing as a way to kind of find survival. And I found that very potent.
Yeah, and that's in the Jasmine Infinity story, like never out someone as a sex worker. Jasmine talks about that as herself, as part of her life, and trying to get out of that. And also talks about being too tall to be a dancer in like chaser clubs, which is just crushing. But becomes a DJ, but techno is the space. The other thing I think more than we anticipated is techno's adjacency to ballroom. Mm-hmm. And I mean, sort of, you know that, but like the specifics of that, I think we got into techno's relationship to like house music as well known, like that's a well-known story. We got this different stories start to come up. You know, that was kind of key. Yeah, I learned so much doing this. It was kind of like, oh, there's all these threads. I sort of intuited they'd be there, and some of them were, and some I didn't even know. Yeah. But the thing I want to say about this is The interesting stuff in culture, in art, always happens when the people who make it are heterogeneous to each other in some sense, where there's some internal friction or difference really matters. It could be about class, it could be about training, it doesn't matter, but there's something, not everybody's on the same page, there's some little friction or tension, and I think that was one of the things I wanted to bring to this. I got it from Malcolm McLaren, who said like good rock and roll bands always have musicians who come from a different class, and the friction between them will drive it, and that was the story of the Sex Pistols, and it's the story of the bands it was copied from too, it turns out, you know. So yeah, that was one of the little lessons for me, is like that's how to do the interesting work, is to get that flavor.
How are we?
Yes.
Is it time? Is it time?
Yeah. There's time for questions. If you're
Okay, what?
Cool. Thank you. Fabulous speakers. Are there questions from the audience? Seymour.
Thank you so much both of you for talking.
You got to speak up a bit because my hearing's bad.
Thank you so much. It was really amazing to hear both of your perspectives. I guess one of the things that I was wondering about is how do you both of you approach this sort of divide between sort of the subculture aspect of experiencing it and kind of going and attending these the raves, and then sort of the more sort of step back approach of analyzing it and writing about it and kind of turning it into an academic practice. That's something that I just personally struggle with, and sort of being involved in like these sort of subculture things where it's sort of not broadcast and just kind of resists that